Hey guys, how's it going? This is Nat Nader. Welcome back to your weekly dose of creepypasta. Longer intro today, so here's a timestamp to the beginning of the reading. Okay, we're back with a continuation of the Ubloo series. The author has written another part 7, which I have split into two halves because it's a really long section and I don't really have time to read it all in one go. But anyway, so this is part 7-1 and you'll have part 7-2 next week. If you're not familiar with the Ubloo series, feel free to check the playlist in the description. It's been a good long series and I have really enjoyed the story thus far. As always with this series, I entirely apologize for my terrible butchering of accents that I'm only vaguely familiar with. I hope they don't detract too much from the story. Also, there's a bit of singing in this part too, which is also terrible. So, enjoy. You know what the story is, so without further ado, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. My second car ride with Eli was nothing like the first. We took my personal vehicle this time, though I took my badge and gun with me just to be safe. I knew it wasn't my first afflicted dream, but this one hit closer to home. And knowing something was out there doing this scared the shit out of me. When in the first instance I rode with Eli, he was completely silent. This time I couldn't shut him up. He rambled about his farm back home in Natchez, how the crops were just about ready to be harvested, and that he planned to donate a lot of it to the local homeless shelter. He talked about his accomplishments at Northwestern and notable alums he had either taught or seen around campus, and how he completely distrusted dogs, much to my dislike, because as a kid, he saw a pack of them surround and kill a rabbit. I'm telling you, they didn't even eat the damn thing, just took turns biting it and shaking it. It was horrible. I didn't mention to him that all he probably had to do was wave a stick at them and they'd run, but then again, letting him talk endlessly allowed me to zone out and think about what laid ahead. Monia Guthrie. Well, not really. I learned from the police database that she had passed away in 2010. She was a resident of Towson for a while, but she later moved to South Lewiston, Louisiana. About a 2-hour car ride down in the heart of the Bayou. Go somewhere more black, Eli had said, was probably her first motive. And who could blame her? From what I understand, a lot of kids faced racial taunting and malicious environments after that preschool was shut down. Monia must have taken it extra hard as well, given that her daughter passed away a few years later. Drowned one night when she had snuck off to go for a swim. If you ask me, that's what drove her to move. She was survived by a daughter she had later in life, whose name I learned was Kyla, and shared her mother's last known address, which I figured might be the best place to start looking. Come on, pull over, Eli said, breaking into my thoughts. Huh? What? I said, slowing the car down. Hell, boy, you haven't even been listening to me, have you? He said, sounding annoyed. I said, pull over here and let me take a piss, Christ. I threw my blinker on and we turned into the parking lot of a diner. When we finally came to a stop in a space, Eli opened the car door and hopped out. Now I'll just be 5 minutes. Don't you go running off on me, you hear? I grunted as he shut the door and proceeded to hustle strenuously up the ramp to the door. It didn't make much sense to me, to be honest. I understand this Monaya woman was pissed about what had happened at the school. That I got. But how did she know how to perform that ritual? Eli had said, Abian too, that it was likely the ritual could have been performed in the past. People had realized that they could stave off the curse by burying the victim alive, and sometimes against their will. But bodies could always be unearthed by mistake, the curse reawakened, or if their theory is correct, re-summoned. I shifted in my seat and looked down at my watch. It had been almost 10 minutes. This is some long piss. The engine was still humming and hung in the thick Louisiana air, like the sound of a far-off cicada. Something about it made me uneasy. I turned the keys in the ignition and shut the car off, and realized it was completely quiet. Eerily quiet. I got out of the car and stretched. I paced a little around the parking lot, stopped at the end of it, watching a small stream babble lazily. Shifted on my feet, tugged at my crotch. Fuck, now I gotta piss too. I walked up to the diner, the bright sun making the dark windows impossible to see through, and pushed the door open easily. There were a few locals sitting at the bar top. They looked like truckers. Behind the counter, a middle-aged waitress with blonde hair was pouring coffee into an older man's mug. "Can I help you, hon?" she said, putting a hand on her hip, the coffee pot still in her other hand. "No, ma'am. Just waiting for my friend. Came in to take a leak." "Ah, older fella, yeah? White goatee?" "That's the one," I smiled. "Bathroom's back there." She motioned over to the end of the diner. "Feel free to wait, or if you need anything, just holler." "Thank you, ma'am," I said, as I made my way over to where she said the bathrooms were. I passed by a jukebox that looked like it was on its last leg. The record inside was spinning, though it was warbling a little. "Hey, hey, baby," the jukebox sang, playing a scratchy rendition of "Hey Baby" by Bruce Channel. "I want to know if you'll be my girl." I stopped outside the men's room door and noted the occupied over the door handle. I let out a sigh and leaned back against the wall. "Sam," I heard called in my direction in a grisly, weathered voice. I looked up and saw an old man with long grey hair and a matching long beard, both of which looked scraggly enough to not have been washed in days. He was wearing a beat-up olive-coloured field jacket and a matching hat that read "Korean War Veteran" across the front. When we made eye contact, he spoke again. "That there," he rasped in a thick Louisiana accent, pointing towards my leg. I looked down and saw the United States Marine Corps logo tattooed on the side of my calf. "That'd match mine," he said, pulling back the sleeve of his coat and revealing a matching, albeit faded, version of mine. "You served, yeah?" I said, nodding to his hat. "Korea?" Yup. He answered, reaching back to grab his cup of coffee. He took a long, audible sip. "So did my granddad," I said, stepping forward off the wall I was leaning on. "To both a spear," the man gobbled through his facial hair. "Jeff Danvers," I said, walking toward him with my hand out. "Lance Corporal." He gripped my hand tight with his dirty palm, gave me a toothless smile. "Robert Jennings." He was gripping my hand tighter now and shaking it vigorously. "Private first class." I frowned at him. "I'm sorry, did you say your name Just then, he pulled a gun from his other hand and shot me in the thigh. "Ah!" I screamed, falling to the ground, clutching my leg. I heard the waitress gasp and the clamor of dining ware hit the floor as a few of the other patrons tried to run. This was followed by 2 more gunshots and a loud thud. "Nobody move," the man said, as I watched him pacing across the diner from the floor. "Now, Robert," the waitress began in a shaken voice. "Let's just talk about this, yeah?" "Shut up," he yelled, waving the gun. I watched as the other patrons ducked and held their heads. He was pacing slowly now past the bar. "Yeah, dunno. The gun was shaking now in his hand as he spoke. I rolled over to get a better view and saw 2 bodies near the door. He must have caught them as they tried to flee. They'd fallen in a way where you'd have to move them to get the door open, which explains why no one else has tried what they did. Out on patrol, and you find your buddy's body lying in the dirt," he said, choking back tears. "And when your other buddy roll him over, the bodies blow kaboom." With that, he fired the gun into the ceiling and staggered. He was practically sobbing at this point. His arm dropped to his side, and he swayed a bit, and I heard him snort back his tears. Slowly, he walked alongside the bar, past a cowering patron, raised the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Pop. His brain splattered back against the side of the bar, and the waitress screamed again. Just then, I saw as the last patron stood up from where he was crouched down and ran at him. He yelled as he ran, "Pop, pop." He fell just a few feet in front of the grisly old man, with 2 shots to the chest, his body slowly leaking out onto the floor. By this point, I'd managed to begin pulling myself up. I was sitting upright against the bottom of a booth and wrenched at the table to pull myself up into the chair. When I finally managed to get myself up, I panted and saw that he was making his way behind the bar to the waitress. "Stop that!" I yelled. "Leave her alone!" He began moving oddly side to side, a sort of sidestep with a sway. Then he began shaking the gun in rhythm with his footsteps. Hey, baby," he grumbled as he moved. I looked over my shoulder and saw the jukebox, still playing the Bruce Channel song. Hey, baby," the jukebox churned out, but skipping and repeating just these lines. The waitress was sobbing audibly now as he made his way over to her. Hey, baby," he said, whipping the gun forward so it was pointed into her stomach. "No, please," she began as he grabbed her hand and kept dancing. Hey, baby." She was sobbing hysterically, him just rocking her arm back and forth. Hey, 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 baby, he said again, and I heard the record needle finally catch and play the second half of the chorus. I wanna know if you'll be my girl. Pop. With the last word, he had stuck the muzzle of his gun under her chin and pulled the trigger. The ceiling now coated in a deep red, with bits of blonde stuck and strewn to the splatter. I winced as the gun went off and recoiled, unready for the sound. He stood there for a moment, staring at the ceiling with that toothless smile. Then his eyes slowly fell to the woman on the ground, laying there, lifeless and cold. His smile faded. Slowly, he turned around and walked back around the diner, headed towards my booth. No, stop this, I said, falling down to the floor and crawling on my elbows and one good leg toward the end of the diner. The record was skipping completely now. The song had ended. It seemed to sync with his footsteps as he slowly paced after me. I'm a police officer. I can help you. Come on, put the gun down and we can discuss this. Please. He wasn't listening and kept getting closer. By now, I had reached the end of the diner and turned to prop myself up against the wall, watching him slowly creep forward. I heard him humming and realized he was still mimicking the jukebox. His toe hit my foot and he stopped, standing by my feet, the gun hanging at his side like a weight. Please, please, I have a wife and son, I pleaded. He smiled down at me again, then threw back his head and let out a long, almost cackling laugh. His head snapped down, and I saw the clean, shaven face of Thomas Abian. Boo, he said, in a voice so dark and deep, it sounded almost fake, then shoved the muzzle of the revolver in his mouth and pulled the trigger. There was just enough time to see his head burst. Ubloo! I snapped awake to the sound of knuckles on the windshield. Hey! I looked over to the sound and saw Eli peering in through the passenger side window. Open up. It's hot as hell in a handbasket out here. Yeah, I said, fumbling for the electronic locks. I snapped them locked at first, and then unlocked them fast. Sorry, must have dozed off. Eli opened the door, and then stopped halfway into the truck as he heard what I said. Oh, he started, then turned to look at me. You alright? Yeah, I'm fine, I said, turning the key in the ignition and blasting the air conditioning. Christ, it had gotten hot in here. Well, I'm ready to hit the road, unless you gotta run in for a quick leak as well. I paused for a moment, and then looked up at the diner of the steering wheel. I caught the eye of a brunette waitress, a little younger than her made-up counterpart. She noticed me staring, then smiled and waved, although I couldn't manage to move a muscle. No, I said, buckling my seatbelt, checking to make sure no one was behind me in the lot. Let's hit the road. The rest of the car ride went about the same. Well, minus the little part where I passed out in a parking lot and dreamt about Robert Jennings going on a killing spree. Eli picked up right where he left off, talking about his career and whatnot. I think he knew I wasn't listening, but just liked having someone to talk to all the same. Life on a farm can't be too social. Eventually, we passed a sign on the interstate that read, "Now entering South Lewiston," and the cab of my car fell silent. The purr of the engine and the steady rush of the air conditioning, the only noise. I looked up at the GPS on my dash and saw we were just 10 minutes out. "Say, Jeff," Eli finally piped up. "Yeah?" "I know we're here to talk to Kyla, but have you given any thought to what you're gonna ask her?" I thought about this for a second or two. "Yeah," I finally responded. Silence again. "And?" Eli asked. "I still don't know." We drove the rest of the way in silence, off the interstate and through a rundown town center, a left and a right here and there, until we reached a small winding road with houses spaced far, far apart. "You have arrived at your destination," the GPS chimed as I slowly crept to a halt over to the side of the road. I shifted the car into park and looked down a long dirt driveway at a small, brown house. It looked like it needed a fresh coat of paint and some shingle work on the sides. A wind chime hung over the porch, with 3 yellow birds dangling amongst the thin metal pipes. I looked at Eli and he looked at me. He nodded, and we both got out of the car. As I walked down the driveway, I looked around. The yard was mowed, to a point. Weeds and tall sawgrass had snuck in from the side of the road, and must have been slowly inching their march into the manicured patches of grass and dust for years now. There were a pair of lawn chairs up on the porch, with a table between them, a glass of what looked like sweet tea sitting on it, sweating in the hot Louisiana air. Eli and I walked up the front steps onto the porch, exchanged a quiet sideways glance. Then I reached up and knocked on the screen door. The sound of footsteps echoed from inside, and then a woman came to the door, opening it a little over a foot, and then stepped halfway out. She looked like she was in her late 30s or early 40s, but was still very pretty. "Can I help you?" she asked suspiciously. "Yes, ma'am. We're looking for a Miss Kyla Guthrie. Is she available?" I said, trying to sound as polite as possible. "She is," she answered. "Speaking, actually." Eli and I shifted uncomfortably in unison, him letting out a short cough. "Ma'am, my name is Jeff Danvers. I'm a police officer with Torson, Louisiana. This is my associate, Eli Jacobs." "Ma'am," Eli said, tipping his hat. "We were wondering if we could ask you a couple questions." Kyla looked from me to Eli, and then back to me. "And what does an officer in Torson need with me?" she asked. "Well, ma'am, we were wondering if, I said, trailing off. "We were wondering if you wouldn't mind us asking you a few questions about your late mother, God rest her soul," Eli chimed in. She used to live in Towson, correct? My mother, Kyla said, turning back towards Eli. She did, yes. Both of us did. But what could you possibly need in regards to her? Ma'am, this has nothing to do with any investigation. We just... Now it was Eli's turn to trail off. We found a note, I blurted out. A note? Kyla asked. Her stare gave me chills. Yes, we found a note from your mother. Kyla eyed us both, now very suspicious. What kind of note? It was discovered at a crime scene at the old preschool in town, I blurted again, Eli giving me a glaring look. Kyla gasped, a little, confirming my very sure, yet skeptical suspicion that she was just as human as I was. Well, come in then. Come in. She opened the screen door and I followed her inside, Eli doing the same after me. Her house was surprisingly cool, which must have been due to the natural shade she got from the surrounding trees. The furniture was a bit dated, but somehow it worked, and the whole place just felt surprisingly wholesome. We followed her to the living room, and she motioned over toward the couch. You can sit there if you'd like. Can I get you anything? Cup of sweet tea, ice water? She asked. Water would be lovely, ma'am, thank you, Eli said, as he took his hat off and sat down. Nothing for me, thanks, I said, following his lead and taking the other side of the couch. Kyla walked through an open doorway into the kitchen as I watched her pull a glass from the shelf, open the fridge, and produce a pitcher of water. She poured it into the glass and then placed it back where she'd got it. She shut the fridge and I squeezed my hands together, dropping my gaze, not letting her know I had followed her every move. Here you go, she said, handing it to Eli. She sat down in a lounge chair across from us. Thank you, ma'am, he said as he took a long sip and placed it on the side table, being sure to use a coaster. We all sat awkward for a second or two, before we all remembered what we had sat down to discuss. So, this note, Kyla started. May I see it? I turned toward a small pack I'd carried in with me and unzipped the top. From inside I pulled out the note, held in a small plastic bag, and handed it over to her. She took it and stared down at it, narrowed her eyes at it, then read it again. I'm sorry. I don't think I understand, she finally said, looking back at us. I let out a small sigh. Patience has never been a strength of mine. Luckily, however, there was an interrogation tactic for this. Come out with the fastball off the bat, and hope you catch him off guard. Ma'am, do you have any reason to suspect your mother would have been involved with voodoo?